Latrobe University acknowledges the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting this evening, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lee Drake. I'm Pro-Vice Chancellor for Employability and Postgraduate Coursework at Latrobe University, and on behalf of the university, it's my very real pleasure to welcome you to this second event in the Bold Thinking Series 2017 on the future of work. Tonight, our panel of experts will look at how digital disruption has changed the way we work, study and live, as well as considering what this means for jobs and labour markets in the future, given the rise of artificial intelligence, automation and robotics. I'm very pleased to say that Latrobe has recently launched Career Ready Advantage, a new comprehensive initiative that gives today's 35,000 students a real edge in the highly competitive labour market, jobs market of the future. Career Ready Advantage has been developed in collaboration with students, but also with a wide range of employers. They told us consistently that degree-based technical skills are important, but they're taken as a given and are not enough. Employers are looking for personal attributes such as passion, curiosity, resilience, and empathy. And they're also identified two key sets of skills: social intelligence, the skills that help you to build and maintain emotionally intelligent relationships in and outside the workplace, and cognitive flexibility, the ability to think creatively and to critically solve problems. Career Ready Advantage also supports students in their career management. Again, employers told us consistently that students who took control of their future really stood out. As well as listening to employers, we also did a lot of global benchmarking and research on key trends and drivers of change, and tried as far as possible to future-proof our students. Now, when we talk about future-proofing and thinking towards the future, we know that's very hazardous, and I always think of the great quotes from the famous Yogi Berra. You all familiar with Yogi Berra? Not Yogi Bear, Yogi Berra. Famous New York Yankees baseball player in the post-World War II era. Probably became more famous for his wisdom and philosophy. The guy who said, it's just like deja vu all over again. When you come to a fork in the road, you should take it. And advice like, always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't go to yours. We all know the phrase, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Yogi's take was, it ain't the heat, it's the humility. And he had a great sense of history and the insights from history. He said that even Napoleon had his Watergate. But on the future, I think he was most insightful. He said, yeah, the future ain't what it used to be. So who here can disagree with that? Whatever the vagaries of the future, our hope is that Career Ready Advantage will ensure that Latrobe graduates will be equipped to meet both the existing and future workforce needs, including the jobs that aren't even in existence yet. So on this theme, tonight's discussion will consider in detail how we need to adapt and what skills individuals, both young and not so young, will need for the jobs and careers of the future, as well as what this means for business and ensuring our economy continues to grow, adapt and diversify in a rapidly changing world. On tonight's panel, we have Dr. Fiona McKenzie, an Associate Professor in the College of Arts, Social Sciences and Commerce at Latrobe University. Fiona is a human geographer with a PhD on innovation and expertise in both public policy and academic research. She's also the co-founder and Director of Strategy for the Australian Futures Project, leading the design and implementation of a range of unique programs, including social innovation labs on early childhood development and agriculture. We also have Adjunct Professor of Latrobe Business School and Chair of the Latrobe Business School Advisory Board, and also a Latrobe alumnus, James Fazzino. He was appointed Managing Director and CEO of IPL Group back in July 2009. And his priorities during this time are centered on people, with programs such as safety and diversity, and business excellence, heading programs focused on productivity and global competitiveness. More recently, he's been leading the company in addressing the challenge of digital disruption, but also grasping the significant business opportunities of big data. Joining Fiona, McKenzie and James Fazzino are Jan Owen and David Metcalfe. Jan is the CEO of the Foundation for Young Australians and YLab, the Global Youth Futures Lab. Her lifelong mission is to unleash the potential of young people to lead positive change in the world. She's a highly regarded social entrepreneur, innovator, influencer and author, and spent 25 years growing Australia's youth, social enterprise and innovation sectors. And David Metcalfe is a National Relationship Manager for LinkedIn, the world's largest professional networking site, partnering with government, health, educational organisations, etc., across Australia and New Zealand to actively build and strengthen their talent brand. Locally, David partners with leading organisations such as La Trobe, City of Melbourne and the ABC. I'm shortly going to be handing over to tonight's host, acclaimed broadcaster, journalist and writer Francis Leach. And in addition to his many well-known attributes and traits, I gather from his bio that he's also a passionate fan of The Clash.
Obsessive, I think is the word.
Obsessive.
Yeah.
Now, as I didn't know about Cold Chisel till I came to Australia about 6 or 7 years ago, I won't take it for granted that people know of The Clash, but a very famous punk rock band back in the day, in the late 70s, early 80s. And I'm trying to picture Francis in Mick Jones or Joe Strummer mode back in the day. I'm not quite getting it, but maybe, like me, he had more hair back in those days.
There was a mohawk involved, Professor. There was.
And to coin a phrase from The Clash, should I stay or should I go now? Clearly, I need to go, at least exit the stage. The panel will hopefully stay and offer us their insights. I'm sure you'll all agree we're extremely privileged to have such a distinguished panel of experts and commentators with us this evening. So please join me in welcoming tonight's bold-thinking panel. Francis.
Thank you, Professor Drake. I'm also a Red Sox fan, so all those Yankees quotes had me almost heading for the exits as well. But it's great to be here tonight. And thank you for coming along to the latest in our Bold Thinking series events, our chance to sit here and discuss with you some of the big issues, the challenging issues that face not only the next generation, but all generations, because change in this particular area is happening so rapidly that everybody who has any thought of trying to engage in the workforce needs to be aware of what challenges are ahead of them, or at least how to adapt to the ones that they can't see coming. I want to start by going back though, because change, I think we need to quantify just how quickly things have changed and how quickly things are changing. So I'm going to ask the panel, David, I'll start with you, what job did your parents do? What did your mum and dad do for work?
My mother was a librarian, thinking about change in the world of legislation and the like. She lost her job when she got married. That was the conditions. My father ran an accounting firm his entire life. One job, one company.
So he was an accountant his entire life. What about for you, Fiona?
My mother was a teacher, and my father is refusing to retire from being a farmer.
Same thing though, one job?
Yeah, same.
Jen?
My father was an academic, so I'm in the right room. I'm the failed like non-academic in the family, and my mother was a literature major, but mostly was a homemaker, whatever that was. But they're also very, very active in the community, so they helped set up Lifeline in Australia.
Oh, okay.
So they did a few things.
James?
Yeah, well, my father had a range of jobs coming out as an immigrant. So he started off as a welder, which didn't go very well because he used to say he used to close his eyes when he used to weld.
Sensible man.
And then he ended up as a sales rep, and then he became a bit of an entrepreneur, had his own business selling mops. And I can tell you that a lot of mops went through the family garage. And Mum was a housewife.
There you go. So a lot of those jobs might still exist today, but they're increasingly becoming, I guess, not rarer, but the idea of having a job for life or a job for an extended period of time certainly is. My dad was a mail sorter, so he physically sorted mail at the old post of PMGs, it was called then, on the corner of Spencer Street and Burke Street. That job's completely gone. There's machines that do that now. Like he would not be employed to do that. So I'm just wanting to start, Fiona, by talking about that, about jobs that are disappearing and changing. Do you believe that it's happening more rapidly now than ever before?
I think it is in certain sectors. I think it's interesting. People talk about jobs disappearing. It's not a new thing. I think the question is, is it happening faster and is it happening in a different way? I would say yes. It's particularly in certain sectors though. So a lot of the, I guess the evidence is around jobs are in manufacturing, in transport, in retail. You know, we're already seeing it. So I think, you know, it can affect whole communities. You know, look at the shutting down of a coal plant. You know, things can happen quite quickly. It's not happening in every sector, but the predictions are also that no sector is safe. So it's not that everyone's at threat or every job's going to go, but it's that there is the shaving around the edges of all different areas. Surprisingly, some of those more maybe traditional teacher and nurse roles, so for where I grew up, everyone who came to the country town where I was basically a teacher or nurse who then married a farmer. Those jobs are actually they seem to be relatively safe.
For the time being.
Yeah, for the time being. People trust humans more than robots, so they're the caring jobs. But yeah, so definitely speeding up.
David, in terms of the speed of change, how quickly do you think people are adapting to not necessarily the jobs that are now being offered, but the idea that they are not going to have a job for life and that they are going to have to reconceptualise what they are in terms of work and their flexibility to change, their need to change, because not everybody's comfortable with change, whether it's at home, in the workplace, or in the wider culture.
I think you're right, not everyone's comfortable, and I think there's an element now where people actually feel that their job perhaps isn't a job that's going to be impacted. But to really echo what Fiona mentioned, a lot of the jobs, like what my father did, accounting, if you actually talk to someone that runs a small business now, so many of those processes are automated through software now, and it's only becoming stronger and stronger. So whilst we've been losing opportunities to have a job for life, if you actually think about it from agricultural through manufacturing to technology now, there is an element, I think, where it's becoming a lot more rapid than what we're used to. We have to really quickly adapt to what our job's going to be, not in 10 years, but in 1 or 2 years. So we talk about that internally as you have to do lots of micro-learning.
That's exhausting, Jan. You know, if you feel that, you know, and it gets to a wider cultural issue that I'm going to touch on, but that sounds exhausting to have to constantly reconceptualise what you do, what skills you have, how you can offer that to the marketplace, and how you might, you know, build a satisfying work experience.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, when I was growing up, there used to be lots and lots of surveys. I actually remember them, they're like front page of the newspaper, like job satisfaction. It's weird how in hindsight we always make things out to be way better than they actually were. So when I talk to a group of 15-year-olds and I say to them, our research says that we expect you to have 17 jobs in 5 different industries, they go, you know, shock horror, because that's a big, bold idea, and we're talking about bold ideas here. But then when I say, and then, of course, your parents and grandparents probably won't understand this because they had a job for 37 years and got a gold pen at the end, after which they, you know, put a caravan on the back of their car and towed it around Australia and then died. They're like, well, that's not really great either, is it? So, you know, we have to be really careful about the kind of rose-coloured glasses that we look at the past in. There is an incredible set of opportunities ahead for young people, but only if, and this is the bold, in fact, outrageous idea, which shouldn't be bold or outrageous, only if we get education and only if we get the preparation and only if we understand the skills and capabilities and the disposition that will be required to be in that new world or that new work order. So yes, it's kind of scary. It's always scary when you're in the transition, and we're definitely in the transition. And yet, some really wonderful opportunities could be ahead for a very different kind of so-called career. And also, what will a career actually be? It'll be a kind of a life of learning and a life of doing. And, you know, as I said, that's pretty exciting to lots of 15-year-olds.
I think we've got the optimists on this side of the house, because, James, you're very much of that disposition as well, aren't you, believing that this is as much about exciting opportunity. You'd rather focus on that than maybe the intimidating nature of change.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I belong to the economic school of glass half full. And you're absolutely right. The speed of change is increasing, but change isn't new. And, you know, I often think about my favourite industry, think about is transport. And if you think about transport 120 years ago, it was horse and buggy, it was trains that went from place to place. And if you wanted to travel overseas, it was boats. And because of that, very few people travelled. And what you didn't see was any of the industries that exist today being built around travel. Fast forward today, we've got trains, planes and automobiles. My kids think it's just normal to travel overseas because that's what everyone does. And think about the industries that have been wrapped around that didn't exist back in 1900, the tourism industry and all of the other industries we've clustered. So whilst it's uncomfortable, what I know that the changes are that happening today will bring out new industries and new opportunities, and I think that's really exciting.
We'll get to what those opportunities and how exciting it is in a moment, but I do want to just take it back to one issue. We live in a community, we'd like to think, that allows a sense of continuity, a sense of purpose and connection. The idea that we might be able to live in our local suburb or within that, raise our children who know the families around them and have that sense of permanence. But if we're living in an economy and a job market which is constantly volatile, constantly changing, and has a sense of impermanence, are we, at some sense, toying with the social fabric? If we have that lack of, sense of perpetuity, so that you can believe that I will work in this community, I know what sort of work I want to do, and I'm quite comfortable being and identifying with who I am. Can I start with Doug?
Sure. I think there's an element, Francis, where you think a lot of us are used to, you have a job that'll give you enough money to buy a home, to go on a holiday, to have superannuation when you're looking at retiring. And I think that's something now which is being questioned a little bit, and that's more of a challenge. I mean, we're in Melbourne right now, and that is front page a lot of days around housing affordability. But if you think about the way jobs are changing, if you think about the freelance economy now, it's actually fundamentally changing our income streams, and it's changing how confident we are we're going to have a job in 6 months, because people are actually taking short-term work. That's a really marked trend in Australia. It's now 1 in 8 people identify as a freelancer in Australia. So I think
that's huge.
It is. It is. It's grown from a LinkedIn perspective, our membership, there's a 50% increase just in 5 years, just in people identify themselves as freelancers.
Because people, I think a lot of people do, rightfully so, want that sense of continuity and that sense of certainty. Yet our new economy might be robbing them of that. Is that a good thing?
For two reasons, I think that's not happening. One is, at the moment, if you live not in a major city, if you live in a country town and you lose your job, you have to move. So you don't have a choice. You lose your continuity. As jobs become automated, digitalised, potentially you can do things offline. You may not have to move or leave your town if you can work remotely, for example. It'd be nice if, there's so much potential for the knowledge economy to reach past the capital cities. That's one thing. The other is that it was actually a survey that's nearly probably 5 years out of date now, so I imagine it's even stronger, but 15 to 17-year-olds that were surveyed about a sense of belonging, 60% felt they belonged to an online community, only 40% felt comfortable in their physical community. So I think a lot of people are getting their belonging in a virtual way.
They are, but you can't virtually volunteer for your local football club or, virtually set up a church group. You've got to be involved physically in that community. You've got to have relationships. You've got to, look people in the eye and deal with them and get to know them. So, before we talk about the changing nature of jobs, the changing nature of jobs is meaning a fundamental change in our understanding and concept of community, isn't it not, James?
Yeah, I think it does. Although, as a company, you need to be aware of your social licence to operate, which actually.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you take our business, we support agriculture and mining. The industries we're in, you need to be invited into those. Our company has the largest phosphate plant in Australia. We've got an obligation there to employ the local Indigenous community. Indigenous employment in my business is now 2% of the population, and that's part of the social contract that you have. So whilst we're becoming a little disconnected, there's an element to which business still needs to be connected in its existing community, and you can't lose that or else you will get booted out of the community.
Because did you not find it was interesting, and it was in some ways innovative that we had this range of large Australian companies just in the last week, Jan, talking about wanting to support a proposal for same-sex marriage, like leading the way socially in that space in a way that they hadn't done before.
And wasn't it interesting how they got politically slapped about?
Yeah.
That was pretty interesting. I mean, this social license to operate is very real, I think. You know, and it's been writ large with quotas and all kinds of things. I mean, this has been kind of almost legislated. So I do see that kind of engagement in local is very real. And to go to Fiona's point, I think it is interesting. I think there are more groups online being formed to meet offline every day, particularly by young people. So they come up with platforms so that they can help people meet offline. So these two things, this kind of hyper-connected world is just completely seamless. So to your point, Francis, of course everyone still wants personal connection and engagement, and I do think they want it in community. And I think it's so interesting that we are back to this kind of almost that, remember that 70s kind of hashtag, although hashtags weren't around the 70s, it was kind of think global, act local or something, whatever, was that the right way around? And so this is like the kind of live local, contribute local, but you're in this hyper-connected global environment. And in theory, you get the best of all worlds in that, in theory, but that doesn't always work for everyone in the same way. So one question would be, well, how do you and how does business help, contribute to building community? I think that's a really, really important opportunity.
Fiona, you called it, you discussed with me the idea of the fourth industrial revolution. That's what we're going through at the moment. Explain what that idea is.
So it sounds pretty, I think it's a good term, but it's basically saying the first revolution, if that was sort of steam power, if the second was electricity, and then the third was sort of computers to start with, the fourth is really this digitalisation of tasks and work. So this idea that tasks within roles can be turned into things that either can be done automatically through software, so say, for example, accounting software, or it can be packaged up and done, for example, anywhere in the world. So it's this question of not just the changing roles of jobs, but the changing location of jobs. So this idea, and then people call it Industry 4.0, is that we're sort of seeing this fourth industrial revolution. There's a back and forth on whether people have just come up with a cool term, and that it's really just, we're overinflating something, but then there's a lot of, there's a massive debate going on and a lot of conversation going on about where this is going, and particularly the World Economic Forum recently had their big event in Davos and all the CEOs and everyone talking about it, and there's a lot of work happening, and there is a lot of corporate engagement actually on this too, so it's been really interesting.
Does it mean less jobs?
I think, well, so I'm gonna give you the answer that I have based on what I've read so far. It's not necessarily a prediction. There's estimates of something like 30 to 40% of jobs potentially having automation involved in them. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that every role disappears. It means the task can change. Other people have said if you take into account the fact that tasks may be automated, you could be looking at something more like 10% job loss. So
that would cause a huge shift in the social contract, wouldn't it, if we accepted an overall 10% loss of jobs in order to facilitate this new economy?
It sounds scary. When you break it down, a lot of the statistics are, it might be 0.5% in services, it might be 1% in manufacturing. Like when you break it across the sectors, it's not so scary. And the question still is, how many jobs will be created? And that's the bit people don't know the answer to. I think there's a lot of, the jury's still out on how much, technology is not magic. Humans don't necessarily have to accept technology. And there's a question of back to social license. At what point do we push back on automation and robotics and say, actually, no, this is enough for us and this is where we don't want to go. We don't want Google glasses. There is a point where it doesn't just become magical.
Because there will be winners and losers, David. There will be those who profit from the new digital economy, who have the skills to do so, and there'll be a different class of people who might miss out. So are we just setting up a new class system based on people's digital literacy?
It's a good question. I think there's a piece around actual people's wages growing, Francis, around if you're currently highly qualified and highly skilled, we're seeing that people are thinking you're going to be working alongside the automation that's going to be occurring. Whereas if you're low skilled, your role might actually not exist anymore. So those that are actually earning pretty significant salaries as we speak now have got potential to earn more. And those that are working in the service industries, where I think one of the biggest impacts will be with automation, are actually going to potentially be earning less, and that's going to further divide two groups of people.
Surely, Jan, in order for this to be a revolution that everybody in some sense has an opportunity to grow in, we need to bridge that gap between those that will be enjoy superabundance because of the digital revolution and those who will be severely impacted upon it and probably forced into intergenerational working poverty as a consequence.
Well, I hope not, and particularly in Australia. I mean, that would be just diabolically wrong in a country like this.
Well, it already exists though, Jan.
I know, and it already exists right now just in every day. I mean, we've got 650,000 and underemployed young people in Australia right here today. We're 136,000 jobs short right here as we sit here today. So this is much more about jobs and job losses. This is more about actually, could we really understand new potential opportunity? Could we have more job creation? Where there's a big conversation about entrepreneurship and innovation in Australia that's kind of been captured by kind of big ideas like, where's the next Google and where's the next Facebook? Actually, it's not about that. The best work that we're seeing is actually people rethinking their old job or their passions or their interests and pointing those into new ways of working and creating new businesses and new jobs. So, our work at FYA is kind of urgent around that because we are sitting with 650,000 18 to 26-year-olds who are taking 4.7 years to find a job for which they trained, got a HECS debt, were messing about in the part-time casualised workforce at pubs instead of getting experience in the area that they wanted to work in. So to me, it's urgent and present and now that we need to get moving on this, and we need to start matching people's skills, dispositions, capabilities with opportunities in the marketplace. So how are we thinking about the future economy? Where are the opportunities? Where does Australia want to be best at? How is business going to help us actually encourage entrepreneurship?
Well, James,
and start,
you're in that
a
space.
new wave.
So how are you realising the sorts of challenges or facing the sorts of challenges that Jan has just painted?
Well, firstly, if you run a chemical plant, the computer runs the plant now. And we've just...
Can I just ask, how many people would that have employed, say, 20 years ago?
Look, at one of our large sites, probably back in the 60s, it would have been thousands. Now it's hundreds. But we've just spent $1 billion in Louisiana building a new ammonia plant. It's the most automated plant in the world. It's got the world's best technology. But interestingly, the thing that will make the difference between it being just an average plant and an outstanding plant is the people. And if you look in my business now, we've changed the nature of work. And so what we've said is, if you're one of the most important people in my business are the people who do the work, and they're the problem solvers, and it's their job to drive productivity. So we've recast their roles. We've taught 5,000 people how to problem solve, and yes, the plant's automated, but when it has a hiccup in the night, it's our people who problem solve the issue and fix it. It's not the computer that does it. So we've recast the role, and at the same time, we've recast the role of leadership. It's no longer the leader's role to solve the problem. It's the leader's role in our company to support the problem solving that's done by the people who do the work. Interestingly, the largest change has been for the leaders. That's where we've got most pushback, not from the people who do the work, because we're giving them new skills. And I think that's a model that we can roll out if you think through your business differently.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Louisiana and the United States. I spent a lot of time there in the last couple of years, and I was in the US in the lead up to last year's election, and in the South in Louisiana, and you could see quite clearly there that the old economy was dead, and that the social contract had been broken, David, in that part of the world. So much so that we have a President Trump because people feel like there's nothing left to lose in voting for an outsider, somebody who probably doesn't represent their values, but offers them at least the best hope of believing that he could crash through and change a paradigm which they feel is stacked against them. But at the same time, US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, his man just last week, said when asked about automation that I think it's 50 to 100 years away. I mean, where does it leave leadership on the issue that James is talking about if someone like that in that position there who's been put into his position of power by people who are at very much on the wrong end of the new economy doesn't even see the change that's happening around him that actually put him in power?
To think about a Trump example, Francis, that I think contradicts what he's trying to achieve with Carrier. Their CEO basically said Donald Trump has come in and he's spent a lot of money and created jobs with Carrier, and the CEO's essentially said most of those jobs in the near future will probably be automated. So he's come in, he's spent a lot of money to create manual, hands-on jobs that the CEO openly admits is going to actually push towards automation very quickly. So I don't know whether they have a great longer-term plan around how. I don't think any country's really knows where they're going to be in 20 to 30 years in this space, but I think some of the decisions we've seen more recently around creating more hands-on roles in manufacturing plants, coal miners and the like, I can't see that being long-lasting.
But Fiona, we've got Snowy 2.0. I mean, our politicians have just come out saying that the way to establish a new economic boom is to build the Snowy River scheme again. We're going retro with our own vision of what the past used to be. You know, we're doing the Yogi Berra. We're looking into the past to try to find our future.
Yeah, I think for me, there's something here about stepping back and being careful that we're not also just reacting to there are losers in the sense of, not losers, but losers in the sense of economic sense. And there is inequality rising, and there are genuine concerns and grievances around the loss of jobs and concentrated loss of jobs in particular sectors and particular locations, and not just in Australia, obviously in the US as well. The thing that I think we need to do, and it's a bit like what I alluded to with technology, our economy, we construct that how we choose to. So if you step back another step, it's not enough to just say individuals have to sort themselves out by being better educated if the settings around them are designed to ensure we always have 5% unemployment, or we always have enough reserves in the market to make sure that there's, that there's not too much inflation in income or things. So we create those settings ourselves. And so I'd love to see more conversation, almost taking that next step back and going back to the social compact. Are we happy with the arrangements we have at that big policy level?
Just reading your paper today about the notion of 7 clusters of jobs or skill sets that people need to have now in order to be flexible in the workplace and to rethink what their career might look like. Can you explain a little bit about what that actually is?
So we kind of cut, and it was a bit to your point actually, we looked at the Australian economy by looking at what were the common skills and capabilities that sat underneath jobs. So if jobs are going to change rapidly, and we expect that they will, let's look at what skills and capabilities are common across areas of jobs. And so it was a different way of cutting rather than kind of industries or careers, although some industries did naturally group. So, and Fiona said it before, one of the growth areas in Australia is the carers kind of cluster. It's an interesting cluster. It's got kind of fitness instructors at one end in it and surgeons at the other. You probably don't want a fitness instructor operating on you, but the point about the cluster was that within a cluster there's enough commonality, and this was very, very, very important for young people coming out of university or higher education, that if you got a job in that cluster, you could make a pathway to other jobs. In fact, up to 13 other jobs in a cluster could be opened up by looking at what the skills and capabilities were. And we looked at 2.6 million job ads. We've done a lot of big data analytics at FIA to come up with these kind of algorithms, I guess. So what was interesting and what is, I think, appealing is this idea that you could upskill or retrain. You don't have to go back and start again. That if you found a cluster that you had a disposition or interest in, you should start getting into that now, whereas right now our underemployed young people are often sitting in bars and making coffee art on coffee as baristas. Actually, let's just try and start in the area that you could end up in, and that over a course of a career where you're going to have many jobs, there are clusters where you could find yourself.
What are some of the other clusters, just so people got a sense? So you talk about the carers.
Carers is one. Informers.
What are they? Like?
Informers have got educators in them, and that's really important. I don't know if everyone knows, but we're going to have one of the few OECDs that is going to have more young people in the next 20 years coming into university and higher education. That's because Peter Costello asked us to have one for the country, and we did. Apparently, we're very compliant in Australia, as we know. So there is a spike coming, which is fantastic. In practical terms, that means literally 200 new schools will be built in Melbourne, just in Melbourne and around Melbourne in the next 5 to 10 years to cope with that and replicate that across Australia. So the informers, so educators, and of course the teacher, and I purposely say educator, because the teacher, it sounds like, of course there'll always be teachers, but there won't in the current form. The teacher is now an educator who is going to be absolutely disrupted in the next 5, 10 years, and in a good way. So let's not think that all digital or automation is a bad thing. In many industries, it's actually going to be incredibly positive for people to do different things, and education's a great example. There are also other clusters, obviously, around tech. The ones that are kind of sitting where there's lower growth, we've already talked about. We call it the artisans, which has got some trades in it that are actually going to be automated. And of course, coordinators, bookkeepers, maths, David's already talked about that. So we're in this kind of, it was a great way to show to young people and to parents and to educators, this is where we see growth. There's lots of broad opportunities in those growth areas, and even in the ones that you can see, but know what you're doing. Know that when you go to uni, that you're making a choice about kind of a conscious choice, because right now our research said that 65% of students in higher education in Australia are now studying for jobs that we absolutely expect will be transformed. Now, we can debate the time, and I'm not going to debate Donald Trump. You only debate in 140 characters. I've read the PricewaterhouseCoopers, the McKenzie,
I can tell you he
the World
hasn't.
Economic Report. He hasn't read the reports. I've read them all, and it's between 5 and 10 years, depending who you talk to.
You better get on to Steve Mnuchin, and he says it's 100 years away.
I just think that's like, go put your head in the sand and pretend something's not going to happen. And I equally agree with Fiona. Like, we do have a choice, but we're not having that conversation.
When you say, okay, let's talk about that. When you say we have a choice, are you saying on the limits of the digital disruption that we're about to experience, you think we still have a choice?
Well, I'd like to ask the business person that. No, I mean that genuinely, because a lot of automation is being obviously implemented because it's efficient and economic for industry, and that makes sense in terms of the bottom line. But at what cost in the end to the worker and the social contract to be a business that provides for a community, not just products but also jobs?
Well, that is part of your social licence. So the trick is to chew gum and walk. So you want the productivity benefits from automation, but in our experience, actually, productivity is driven by the people who do the work, not the automation. So lesson number one. But the other thing is you want to create the new business that's associated with big data. So if you look in our business at the moment, the thing that's the biggest opportunity we've got is we're an explosives company. We set off blasts on mine sites. And if you think about the data on a mine site to reduce the total cost of mining, which is a key driver of Australia's economic future, how can we improve that? And what we know now is with the computing technology, it's probably through big data. So we've set up an innovation lab in San Francisco. We chose San Francisco, obviously, because it's in Silicon Valley. In the US, we run our business from Salt Lake City, so it's very close to San Francisco. And we're going through a very different model in terms of leveraging that big data. So we've pulled a whole heap of IPLers out. We've brought in a number of people from other industries, some from mining, some from the computing industry. We've also brought in a whole heap of hackers who want to come in and work on our project. Actually, interestingly, not so much for money, but it's really interesting. And I've given them $10 million and said, let's go away and we'll experiment about how we can come up with ways to leverage the data we've got on mine sites. But the way we're experimenting is a lot different to how we've done it in the past. In the past, we'd work on something for 3 years, bring it to a customer who would say, well, that's not exactly what I wanted. This is now more rapid innovation. So we're developing multiple products every 6 weeks, and we're doing very much the test and evolve. We think that'll transform our business and help us grow employment globally, because we can move our business to being the explosives provider to being the mine optimizer through big data. And I think if you think about your business that way, you'll be the business that isn't destroyed. You'll be the business that destroys other businesses through this digital disruption.
And in the same way, you're possibly looking at trying to create a business that creates jobs that you can't even imagine exist yet.
Absolutely, and that's the leadership challenge, because as CEO, the key challenge here is I don't know what the answer is, right? So traditionally when you think of a CEO, people think you know the answer to everything. Well, I don't, right? So my role as leadership's changed. My role is to create the innovation lab, to create the space where innovation can happen, and to recognise I don't have the answer, to put the infrastructure in place where people can ask the silly questions. And my key role is to ensure that when we run the experiments, number one, if you fail, you're not going to get fired, but secondly, you fail really quick, and we move on to the next innovation really quick. And that's a really different leadership model, and probably something you wouldn't hear a CEO say. In fact, to support this, we've set up a Shark Tank, and I'm not on the Shark Tank, and that's $10 million we're spending. So that's a really good example of changing the way you do work.
Leadership. That sounds like it's the key to this in a way. And I know that you're passionate about a different way of understanding what leadership is in this new digitally disrupted, somewhat new frontier economy.
Yeah, and actually, I think leadership is so much more about now, we've got a saying in the business, the people who do the work improve the work, and it's the leader's role to work on the business, not in it. And so if you think about what I'm doing, I'm working on the business here. It's my job to provide the settings where we can develop a new business. It's not my job to go in and do that. That's others' jobs. Now, in the future, people can choose where they want to be. And I think the challenge is for when people transition between doing the work and leading the work. And that's a key skill that we could teach.
Are we ready, though, and are we educating our next generation to be flexible enough to take on these challenges? And Jan, I know you're extremely passionate about this, but I'll start at this end with you, David, because it seems to me that we've gone through a phase from, say, the post-Whitlam era where there was a belief in a classical education, and you could, even the classical idea of going to university, for the pursuit of knowledge itself, to becoming so economically rational with our tertiary education that it was vocationally driven. So that if you're a university, you had to show that the courses you were offering made people job ready. But if we don't know what the jobs are, what are we training them for? And have we got to a point with our universities, and I'll include La Trobe here, where we've been able to reimagine what the role of higher education is in order to prepare people for the unknown?
We're talking about this actually recently at La Trobe. We were having a conversation around this. And there is the piece now where people are going into 3 to 4 year courses, and the courses are changing so quickly that by the time they come out after 4 years, the technologies they've learnt in year 1 and year 2 aren't necessarily going to be right for when they step out into the workforce.
What's the point of that?
Well, the university is obviously, and other universities have to adjust to that as well, Francis. So you might learn one programming language, to use a simple example, but midway through the course, you might have to just turn a little bit and learn another one. I don't think there's a perfect science in how to formulate a undergraduate course to prepare someone to walk out and be ready. Yeah. I think the thing is you have to keep up as much as you can. It's virtually impossible to be ahead of it, but if you can just keep up as much as you can.
But isn't this a philosophical policy setting that needs to be decided at government level, that education isn't just about a vocational experience, that if you are going to prepare people for jobs we can't see, what we need is an army of critical thinkers who can adapt? And if all we're teaching people are skills about the jobs that might be there and then be gone, we're not doing that, are we?
I think there is it's probably a long-standing discussion around vocational versus more traditional classical education. I think the best thing a university can do is teach someone you learn how to learn, and that is what I think. Don't think that's actually changed. I think that is the role. I think that there's, from what I've seen, and sort of your question around, younger people coming through ready for this and these sort of challenges. Just from one experience, I ran some sort of innovation mini hack labs with the Aspire students at La Trobe. So year 12 students who had basically, through demonstrated leadership within their community, gained sort of entry to this Aspire program, as well as their academic performance. And they were so switched on and so passionate about issues, global issues, all sorts of things. And yeah, I was just blown away. So I don't think, well, obviously the schools were doing well, but I think that the universities are thinking about, well, what are those cross-cutting capacities that people need? But again, I think, one of my best mentors, he always said to me when I went back to university and did my PhD and I was stressing about topics, and he said, look, I did my PhD on lettuce, and it doesn't matter so much. It's an apprenticeship of how to research and how to think. And I think that's the important part. And I don't necessarily think that's new, but it is interesting to watch that debate unfold, particularly with some of the dramas around vocational rorting and all sorts of things happening. So it's an ongoing thing. Sometimes it's a bit of snobbery, sometimes it's real. But it obviously needs ongoing discussion.
Yeah, Jan, because you spoke earlier about an army of young people who didn't know what they were studying for, or didn't have a concept of which cluster, as you put it, they want to sort of like rumble around in as a career, what they feel instinctively good about. So what do you think the policy setting should be for education, whether it's tertiary or otherwise, that prepares people to have that flexibility?
I'm a bit radical here.
Go right ahead.
I think actually the research is globally really, really solid now about early years, how critically important the early years of learning are, and how that actually sets up and sets the foundation for what happens across a lifetime. So when I think about education now, or learning, and I would rather think about it as learning, and I would rather think about it as a life of learning, not lifelong learning. And this is a mindset shift that for anybody of any age actually, about this idea that we're going to be in this continuous place of kind of learning, and that learning is a great thing. It's not a thing you have to go away and do. And it's an incredible and wonderful challenge for a university, because you could actually partner with people. You could be a learning partner of someone for their whole life if you actually got this right. And that's a powerful idea, I think. So from prep through to school education, through to higher education, through to vocational education, through to lifelong learning, this idea that everything we know now about learning, which is very good now, which is that experiential learning, which is that learning based on lived experience, which is that learning based on trying and building things and breaking things and making them again, which is learning based on collaboration and working in teams, which is learning based on actually something meaningful that really adds value to yourself as a person or to the community. Everything that we know about learning now and what sticks, and everything that we also know about Generation Y and Generation Z, as they're called, which is just getting ridiculous, this kind of under 18s, is that they learn, and because of the context that they're in, digital context, they learn in very, very, very different ways. But it's exciting, because it actually means that there is more opportunity to do interesting things and to learn in interesting ways. So there is a world of opportunity. I mean, Australia could be truly not just education, our third largest export, but actually an education nation. We could be best in the world at educating our own people, not just exporting education, which is sort of weird, because we're not doing well on international standards at school education and with PISA and NAPLAN and other. We're just not. So we're actually slipping behind. So, this is really, really, really important. And I'll give you one example, two examples. We run a program at FIA called $20 Boss. You get $20 if you're in year 8, 9, 10, 7, 8, 9, 10 for a month. In that month, you have to set up a business that kind of is not just a widget for a widget's sake, but adds value to someone or something. At the end of the month, you pay the $20 back with $1 interest. Any money you've made in that business, you put into your business or into your community or into your school. And then we watched what happened. 98% of the students paid the $20 back. That was pretty amazing. So they made it and paid it back. But more importantly, 60% of those students said it had never occurred to me that I could set up something myself, and I discovered that I could. That was amazing. Many, many, many students joined up, collaborated, shared their $20. So collaboration went crazy. Many students didn't have ideas, but quickly worked out B2B. I don't have an idea, but I can build websites for $5 each. I can build you a website. And on and on and on it went. One kid Airbnb'd his bedroom, a 14-year-old. He's never cleaned it up in his whole life. He Airbnb'd his bedroom, made an absolute mozza in a month, and gave that money to his favourite charity. Other young people who came from really difficult contexts pocketed their $20, collected pieces of wood from around their community and built things, pooled their $20 to go to market, and on and on and on it went. That was one. Year 9 is the worst year. Every teacher says it. I was a year 9 and I was probably the worst year. I watched 300 year 9s last year at Brisbane State High, big state high school in the centre of Brisbane, involved in a program that was after school, which was a social entrepreneurship program. They had to solve a social problem in their community. 300 year 9s, which was almost a whole year level, ran at this program, which involved after school, and pitched and came up with the most incredible ideas, of which several have been picked up by very smart VCs and co-working spaces in Brisbane to make large. So we know we can do it differently.
So what was the key to having them so engaged? What do you...
Learning differently, doing things that are meaningful and make a difference to other people's lives. Young people are actually altruistic and aspirational. It's fantastic. And then learning in different ways. The only thing missing in all that whole story, Francis, is there is no way right now that any of the examples I gave are formally assessed as part of the learning of those students. So they do not leave high school in Australia with what I would describe as a portfolio, which has your ATAR and your academic stuff, critically important, but your enterprising skills as demonstrated in a range of different contexts, and then your ability to manage your career.
It's like a different version of the baccalaureate in a way that we could develop.
Yeah, but one that everyone could do, and again is very, very, very accessible.
An exciting concept if we could get it to catch on. Is it the key to that, again, is it not, is a revolution in the mind of politicians and leaders about what they value from students coming out at the other end?
Well, it's two things, and I think, again, Fiona touched on this. One is this is not just an atomised individual's problem or issue to solve. You know, there's that kind of old idea that pull your socks up and just come up with something is kind of not going to work in the future because, number one, we're an ageing population. So in the next 35 years, there'll be 1 taxpayer to 5 retirees. That's a big number. So we need every young person today to be very educated and very productive, just saying. And we probably need a lot of people not to retire also, just saying. So, you know, this is more about where do we want to go? Where collectively as a country do we want to go? Where do we see ourselves in the future? What do we want to be best at? And then if we told young people that, they would go with it. Of course, they would say, yes, I want to contribute.
Now, the other big challenge, I think, to this is the transnational nature of the really big digital forces in the world. So if Apple and Amazon and Google and whatnot can literally set up base wherever the hell they like, wherever the conditions suit best, how do we as a nation state control our own destiny when it comes to the tax space and whatnot? If these big companies have almost set up in direct opposition or direct power opposite to a nation state like Australia, because they can, ship their profits offshore or go somewhere where it's where the tax regime is a lot friendlier. What control do we have in the new digital economy then, David?
I like the early example from a few people that have spoken tonight around you might work locally, live locally, but be part of a bigger international community. I think I think the days of saying that we have an Australian company and we work for an Australian company that's not going to be expanding globally or looking for B2B relationships with the likes of China, that's gone. I don't think we're ever going to go back to that model. Setting up a data center in San Francisco, it just shows just spreading out to actually capitalize on a hub of data scientists that live in Silicon Valley and alike. I think it's a challenge as a country, but I think you actually have to step up and say, if these companies are expanding into Australia, what can we actually do to support that? Because if we have some of these really big organisations, Alibaba is now coming to Australia, one of the biggest online organisations in the world is coming to Australia. That's actually going to create local jobs where people are going to earn local money that they can spend in their local communities. And to
Amazon
hear
as well.
Amazon, exactly. That's another
But
great
my
example.
perspective is, have you seen the rest of the world compared to Melbourne and Sydney? I mean, Australia is a sensational place to live. So firstly, I think we could rethink our place in the world. We are a fantastic place to live with a lifestyle that is unbelievable. So people are going to want to cluster here. For me, the real opportunity, because I run a global business from Melbourne, is to ensure you can capitalise on that. And there are going to be some winners and losers. So once again, when we think about our business, 21 major chemical plants around the world, with big data, why do you need anyone running the plant on the plant? If Rio Tinto can drive trains on the Pilbara from Perth, can I run those 21 plants from Melbourne, because it's a fantastic place to live and I'll attract lots of talent from to Melbourne. So I think if we can rethink our competitive advantage, which is actually we're here, then I think we can win this. Now, there are some settings we need to get right too. Tax we need to get right.
Well, if there's one adult for every 5 retirees, we damn well need to get it right, don't we?
Yeah, but once again, you can rethink the role. Are we about dividing up the cake, or do we want to make the cake bigger? So we can lower the tax rate and make the cake bigger. That's what's wrong with the national debate. It's all around how you cut things up rather than make things bigger. So I think we can have our cake and eat it too if we think about the competitive advantages. Going back to education, if we're one of the world's biggest educators, we ought to have one of the world's biggest pools of talent. And look, if you've been to a lot of Asia, a lot of Asian students who are coming here probably want to stay here. So once again, if we can rethink our competitive advantages and build clusters around some of our great industries, and education's one, we should be able to attract far more industry here, because it's going to be less about the distance and much more around the benefits of the location, a lot of which is lifestyle.
Fiona?
I was just going to add, I think often people start talking about taxation. I think the point around competition is really important, and particularly, for example, competition law at the moment, it is quite traditional in the sense that we do think of Australian companies, when really what is actually made in one country anymore. It's really about competitive supply chains. Things are made globally, and thinking about how do we compete. Often there's been prevention of competition or prevention of mergers and things because we're thinking domestically, but we have to think about how we're going to win jobs globally and how we're going to compete globally and how we're going to be part of the best supply chains. So I think that really does mean we do have to start challenging ourselves around where the boundaries are, and are they really just about the circle around Australia, or is it really about we're part of a global economy, we want to bring jobs here, how do we think differently?
All right, enough from me up here. Over to you now to ask questions of our panel. You've heard the conversation for the last hour or so. We have 2 microphones. Pio and Christina, I think, has a microphone over here on the right. So if you've got a question for one of our panellists, feel free to stand up, put your hand in the air and identify yourself and ask away. So over to you. Pio is over here. Christina's there.
I've found a number of the ideas being discussed quite tantalising. I started off from a position that's 10 years ago when George Soros said that in the contemporary organisation, the experience of relationship has been replaced by the experience of transaction. My observation since is that's an accelerating sense of disaffiliation of any notion of the work or the shared task being long-term, having any sort of term. What I'd like to ask about, because this puzzles me, thinking about Gen Y and Z or whatever, it still seems to me that listening to what's been said, certainly about the numbers of unemployed and underemployed, which I think is significantly bigger, as I understand it. How does one, and relating that, I'm sorry, also to social contract and connectedness, the things I've heard. I also thought I heard Salman Rushdie mentioned, which made me sit back. But my question is thinking about the next generation, are they going to be able to find some real sense of connection about work? And if they can't, where might they find a sense of affiliation, which I'm suggesting they need, that sense of connection, or only connect, that a generation wants? And where might they find that at work or in a revolution? I mean, I'm in a real revolution.
You mean you want a revolution?
Yes, well, my children do.
Yeah. I mean, there's, there is a real risk to the social intergenerational contract right now. And I don't, by the way, like getting into intergenerational kind of battles. I don't actually want to go there. But the risk is writ large, as we all know. I mean, housing affordability, jobs, everything is very definitely changed. And I think young people could feel that they are not prioritised in the national agenda, put it that way. And it's Youth Week this week, by the way. Just, I don't know if anybody knows that, which could say a lot. So to your question, yes, we need to sort out some structural things, and I think we need to renew the kind of commitment for what is it that the offer, what is the commitment that we're making. We understand that you're inheriting a whole heap of global challenges, by the way, not just local challenges, and that we expect that we're going to need to collaborate across jurisdictions around the world on those, and that on top of that, you're going to want to probably get work, have families, live, but also probably all of that differently. And so my question is, are we having that conversation? So I'm already working with, we work with 200 young social entrepreneurs across Australia. They're already doing things differently and building entire communities. I've got a guy called Al Jeffrey who's built in Melbourne something called Base Camp, which is completely different. It's co-working and co-living, like Airbnb meets co-working, meets WeWork or whatever. And that he's got a lot of people signed up to that. But I also equally know people who are much older, in 65 years of age, who have bought apartments together in the outer fringes of Melbourne because they've decided that they're going to do old age, not in the way that their parents did it, but they're going to bring in services as and when they want it, and they're going to group together. So maybe the grandparents and their children aren't actually that far apart. We're both going to be living differently and working differently. That's not my issue. My issue is, will we redistribute the wealth? Will we ensure that the protections are there in a very, very casualised labour market, which is what they're in now? Are we actually heading to a place where the risks are very high in the work environment because you don't get any of the conditions that we've come to expect in Australia, super, holidays, loadings, whatever it is, and that debate's right now today. So this to me is, there are a lot of risks in the future of work. It works really well if you've got a network, if you know people, if you can get a job, and if you're in a growth industry and you have got a global kind of future. But if you don't, I think there are very real risks, and I think inequality becomes a very significant issue. And as I've said, morally, of course, that's wrong, but also from a productivity perspective in Australia, because of an ageing population, it's not going to be possible.
I think one of the huge...
Just substitute question, how optimistic are you about that? I mean, there are interesting programs and they're hopeful and so on, and what we should do. What do you think is really going to happen?
I don't know what's really going to happen, but I can tell you one thing. I'm incredibly optimistic about the talent and the passion and the interests of young people.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing I'd point to is where there's being a revolution, quite rightly, is half of the young people now have an opportunity that, frankly, our mothers never had. And, if I think about the huge opportunity for Australia is with regards to diversity. And that's one way that we can say we can solve for this gap. I think it's absolutely sensational now that we're finding a lot more women on boards. On my executive team, I run a chemical company. A third of the people are women. And some of our major sites globally are being run by women with far better outcomes. So where I think it is far different than my generation is if you're a woman, the opportunities are absolutely different to what I experienced, and quite rightly so. And I think that's one of the levers we can pull in terms of creating wealth, and of course in terms of equality. Allowing women to have the same opportunity as men is a huge step forward in equality in the community.
We got any more questions? A few down the front, so we'll come down here.
I've been listening to what people have been saying here very carefully, and the concept of incredible opportunities in the future for young people it's a concept that I would endorse wholeheartedly. But how does all of this opportunity, how does all of this change in the workplace, how does that actually translate into shortening the queues at Centrelink?
How do we get more people into work as
Exactly.
a consequence?
Yeah. Well, as I said before, we're already short, so we've focused, and I'm really, really interested in a national focus around entrepreneurship. I don't think it's the answer to everything, by the way, and again, not everyone's an entrepreneur, but the idea that we genuinely need more job creators, that there is genuine opportunity for businesses to start thinking about, I think, a lot more, and we actually are seeing some businesses do this, think about procurement into communities where people are actually trained up and setting up businesses. There are different ways of doing things. You can procure your supply chain all over the world in all kinds of ways, or you could say, actually, there's a percentage that's going to go through my local community where we live. And we've got some of those contracts that are in place already, but we could do a lot more. So there is no doubt we need to be very, very explicitly focused on how will we encourage young people to actually get the experience of entrepreneurship, which is why we're working with young people in schools, so that at least if some of the time they're going to have to work for themselves because they are not working for someone else, that they have this adaptable skill set to do that. And I'm not saying that's easy, by the way, but I think it's necessary.
But it's interesting too, because not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur,
No.
and some people do want to make stuff. I mean, it's intrinsic to the human experience, is it not, Fiona and David and James and Jan, that some people just want to be left alone to make things, and we still need people to make things. So how do we accommodate those people in there?
Well, interesting. It's actually a good segue, but it's 2 points. One around the Centrelink queue. Unemployment rates are actually, it's really interesting. They're actually highest in outer urban areas generally. So it's actually not in a city. It's not necessarily remote or even regional to some degree. It's actually the urban fringe. And a lot of that has been because a lot of business has hollowed out from there, and a lot of it is concentrating in the CBD, or or it's just disappearing altogether. So the question is, if there's expensive housing, there's all these reasons and challenges with congestion and everything else. Why can't we think big about the opportunities about creating new clusters that are actually outside the CBD? I think that'd be an amazing step forward for a lot of these areas that do have, some places in Sydney are 20% unemployment, some of the fringe suburbs. So, there's a lot of there where you start thinking about planning, geography, community, and actually it does require leadership again to think about, well, where do we create these clusters? And
It's really interesting you bring that up, because in our last Bold Thinking Series event in Bendigo, we had Rob Hunt from the Bendigo Bank talking about this, and he spoke about the centralisation of capital. So that, say, for instance, with superannuation, it's gone into these big super funds, and people sitting in boards in big cities like Melbourne and Sydney make a decision about where they're going to invest that money. Yet he's made this really, I think, brilliant observation. The community's become, in some sense, de-incentivised and rather passive in that experience. So a community like Bendigo, which probably could, with the right social capital and the right access to capital, make some really interesting decisions about how, as a regional centre, it might be an enterprising and entrepreneurial environment, doesn't have access to that funds and doesn't have access to that capital to do so. Other people at another level somewhere else are making that decision for them. How could we decentralise the capital and give it back in some sense to those communities so that they have some sense of control and destiny, which I think would foster leadership, innovation, and putting it a little bit on the line, then making decisions for themselves and then being incentivised to make them work.
Latrobe's a good example. I mean, the government's just sunk hundreds of millions of dollars into the Latrobe Valley. There's a whole heap of new announcements. There's a whole heap of opportunities for new businesses. So, yes, I mean, exactly to that point, they don't want to hollow out the entire valley. The mine's been shut down, and so there's been, a huge contribution. And like Bendigo, and Bendigo's actually pretty good, by the way, as a community, like very good, as the community also needs to organise itself around those resources and that capital and the infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it's a little... I actually disagree with that because big companies ultimately have to deploy your capital. And if you think about where we deploy our capital, we've spent $5 billion in Queensland and it's all in remote Queensland. I can assure you don't put an explosives plant near anything. And the advantage of what we do is for every job we got inside the fence, we got 5 or 6 jobs outside the fence. So sometimes when people talk about manufacturing dying, what they forget about is going back in 1960, there was 6 jobs inside the fence and 0 jobs outside the fence. Now it's 1 to 6. If you look at the communities that service our plant in Moranbah, they're actually local businesses. Yeah. So when we built in Moranbah, it was the first... Moranbah's 1,000 kilometres out of Mackay. We make ammonium nitrate to blast met coal that produces steel in China. So when we built that plant, first large chemical complex in Moranbah, there is a local business that never existed before that does the instruments, because instrumentation on chemical plants is specific. We have local businesses that come in and do a lot of the fabrication on the plant. An ammonium nitrate plant's extremely corrosive, so there's a welding industry there that never existed before. So I think you need to think a little bit more broader, and that's why actually things like getting the settings right for global investment are so important, not because of the global investment per se, but because you can cluster businesses around that. I think what we don't think about in Australia enough is how we build not only industries, but clusters around the industry. So if you take what we do on the other side of our business, which is fertiliser and food, we don't think enough about then how do you value add that food and what type of industries can you build around that. The great scandal, I think, in a mining boom is Australia hasn't got one of the world's largest heavy engineering industries. All of that was done in shipyards in Thailand. So when I think the role of government, the role is to think more carefully around the industries and how you cluster skills around those. And that's how you get your multiplier impacts.
As an example, I live in Geelong, and if you go back, Geelong's built on manufacturing, and sadly that's all gone. Like the majority is now gone. But if you think about the cluster that both the state government and the federal government have worked together on, it's working around social insurance. So you've got the NDIA, you've got the Transport Accident Commission, you've got WorkSafe that are about to relocate to Geelong, and then you've got a couple of other federal departments. You've got the ATO have actually moved there. All of a sudden, it's actually becoming a hub where you've got a lot of allied health professionals that look to a regional city that's 1 hour away as leaders in that space. And those departments are actually collaborating to put best practice worldwide in place for social insurance. And that's just a decision the government's made to actually say we don't need those head departments to be in a Melbourne, a Sydney and a Brisbane.
And if you think globally, we should be thinking about that running Obamacare. Yeah. If we truly want to be a global community. Because I can assure you, doing business in the US, they certainly messed that up. So once again, if you think about some of the industries of tomorrow, which a lot of it will be health and how you pay for that, if we thought more globally about what we're trying to do, you can take a global position. And if you think about what we're talking about, digital, you can run anything from Geelong.
I was just going to say, we ran an initiative called My Geelong, My Idea, and the premise behind that was that ask the citizens what they want. Like, don't come in with a lot of money and just actually kill whatever seeds of entrepreneurialism that are already there. Actually think about that and there were some amazing ideas came forward, and the winning idea was actually a makerspace. So, but using 3D printing, all the latest technologies, and a meeting place for all the people who are artisans and all sorts of people in Geelong who really do want to rethink their identity, I guess. But it was two things that combined: the wanting to connect, but also wanting to make things, but do it in a 21st century way. And it comes back to the point around creating clusters, but also not just coming in as, I think government has to set direction, but also not come in with big plans and big dollars and actually kill local spirit.
I think we have some more questions. There's a question down the front here.
Thank you for that. So we're living in a constantly kind of destabilised global world in terms of security. We've got refugee populations that are moving to a point of crisis in many parts of the world, and generally racialised communities within the labour market tend to be pushed into low skill labour and are often the most affected when industries fail or decline. And in this economic environment where there is an advantage for high-skill labour, where do you see their role in this space?
Well, it's actually something I really worry about because I'm from that background. My parents came out from Italy, and exactly when I think of mum and dad, they worked in those lower skilled roles, and it's one of the reasons why losing things like the car industry, I don't think we're thought broadly about that, apart from the fact we managed to lose the world's best manufacturer in Toyota. So I worry about that because these are the stepping stones to bigger jobs and advantage. Once again, I think we can think more carefully in terms of government about our competitive advantages as an economy and start to build on those. If you take an example, Australia's just about to become the world's largest exporter of gas through the Gladstone LNG plants. The thing we lost was, if you look at the country who we've just overtaken, which is Qatar, they managed to build that same industry plus the world's largest petrochemical industry. And, in those manufacturing industries in petrochemical, Qatar's created around about 200,000 jobs. If you think about the nature of those jobs, manufacturing jobs, what does manufacturing do? My business, we take people who aren't skilled and we skill them up. So once again, I think we could think more carefully about our competitive advantages.
Yeah, I'm just interested in that too, James. In a way, we've almost accepted our fate as a non-manufacturing country now. And I know there was a debate around the Northwest Gas Shelf project, was there not, about 10 years ago, about having that pipe come back on shore in Darwin and it being a major processor of LPG and us having our own stake in that as a country. Yet we once again turned our back on that, and sort of our instinct was, as a primary resource producer, get it in the ships and sell it, and it's someone else's problem. How do we change that mindset?
Yeah, well, once again, if I go to the US, where we've, as I said, just spent $1 billion, the US has just created 1 million manufacturing jobs on the back of shale. Now, once again, if you think of the US's mindset is, how do we get the shale out of the ground, the gas out of the ground in a way that doesn't pollute the environment? And I've got to assure you, in the US, they've got the world's most aggressive EPA.
Well, they did have until Scott Pruitt got hold of it.
But even today, what people don't understand is you've got the state EPAs. So regardless of what Trump does with the federal guys, you've got the state EPAs who regulate that. Compare that to Australia. We've said, let's lock the gate on technologies. Let's not drill for gas in this state. Now, when it comes to winter and our gas prices triple or quadruple,
well, energy crisis,
was that a good outcome? So, frankly, it's not that hard. We need to think about our competitive advantages and build industries around our competitive advantage. If you think about education, that's exactly what we've done at La Trobe. I mean, I think La Trobe is a fantastic example of an enterprise that's a global enterprise that's managed to, be one of Australia's great exports, I think. As I said, the trick is to change that and to create some clusters around it. So it should be the factory of the future, if you like, or of the next range of labour, so that we do things more on the Chinese boom than build apartments. We put people in them and build industries around them. So that's just what we want to do, and there's plenty of examples globally that we can follow.
Do we have some more questions? We do. Suddenly the hands are springing up as we get towards, as I would call it, red time.
Hi, I just had a question actually in regard to how we're actually bringing along Gen X and the baby boomers. We talk about obviously preparing Gen Y and Gen Z for this change that we have in technologies and digital disruption. But I myself am a Gen Y, and I think even within Gen Y there's almost intergenerational change. From my experience, I think the first time I used a computer was pretty much at university. Very different, and yet I'm also a Gen Y. So I'm just wondering, how do we now upskill our latter Gen Ys, our Gen X's and our baby boomers to actually come along for this ride? And who's really responsible? Is it a combination of the individual, of corporate, of government? Where's that conversation?
That's a really interesting question. Can I join in this as a Gen Xer? I know lots of people in my industry at the moment who are in the broadcast and media industry who face this very challenge. And even my friends who work at Fairfax are going through it, and I think they're going to go through it again in the next few days, of redundancies and long-term careers coming to an end, and then having to reimagine yourself, Jan, at the age of 50 as a freelancer, and finding out that you're in that cluster, as you said, an informer, and trying to work out how you then re-engineer your career, given all the skills that you've developed in a sort of linear form for so very long. It's quite, for some of them, it's incredibly frightening.
Yeah, and really tough, because again, if you were on that idea that you're on this ladder endlessly, and then you kind of got the gold pen for whether that was good or bad, that's a very big shift. And so for anybody, and I think it is harder if you're in it, for anybody to reorient and to have to pivot. Having said that, I think this is why we keep talking about kind of the mindset. It's why the clusters that we create, and clusters like #cluster tonight on the panel, that's why the clusters we created actually apply to anybody. They don't just apply to school leavers. And in fact, I've had a lot of parents talk to us about the clusters from their own perspective and say, wow, this has helped me think about where I can take the skills and capabilities I have, and given me some other options. You know, there's 13 other jobs that actually I'm linked to if I can work out how to articulate what I can do and how I can do it. So again, but it is a very insecure place, and it's very insecure if you're a parent, and it's very insecure if you're trying to get a house, or, you know, we haven't set up the system around this different way of working. We don't have even our banking system that says, I accept that you've had 5 jobs by the time you're 28, which is what most 28 or 30-year-olds have got. They're like, well, what's wrong with you? You know, we're still getting that. And employers are still saying things to younger people, well, why have you had so many jobs? You know, as opposed to saying, actually, I can see where you've been, I can see the skills and capabilities that you've gained, and also employers in a competitive country should be saying, it's awesome that you spent 3 years with us, we've trained you up and we're giving you to another industry or another sector. That's a contribution actually to growing GDP in the country. That's my view. So everyone should see it as a contribution to the broader. And then of course this is where universities come in, or higher education institutions, because it's going to have to be done differently. You are not going to go and start again with a brand new course and a brand new degree. You're not going to be able to afford it. It's not going to make sense, because by the time you've spent 4 years, the job may have changed. But getting credentials, getting credentialised, working out how to, employers are also very interested in this, how they're going to help you upskill and retrain becomes absolutely central.
Yeah, one thing we think about is, number one, it is industry's responsibility. So we call that our 50%. One of the things we think about with a lot of our training is to make sure now that the training we give internally comes with a certificate, and so it's recognised, because that's how we future-proof some of our people. So I think industry has a role to play. If you look at going back to the car industry, that's not a bad model. There's been a lot of retraining, and you know, give Ford, General Motors and Toyota their credit, they've recognised their social licence and the need to actually not just let those people go, but to provide some skills.
There's also the fact that at the moment, ageism in some ways drives this problem, where maybe technology will drive it later. So a lot of the startups in Australia are actually over 50s. So the highest startup rate for small business, people having to go out on their own, is in their 50s because they have to. And so one of the, and again, it was similar to My Geelong, but it was called My Big Idea. It was a national ideas competition that we ran. One of the top 10 ideas was a senior entrepreneurs program, and that's actually being worked through at the moment around how do you create the ecosystem and the support, recognising people do have to go out on their own. How can they help each other out and take less risk, because they can't afford to stuff it up, because they're at the point where they do want to retire sooner rather than later. So it's really is that thinking about, how do you get out there in your 50s and still have a good career and keep going.
I think we've got time, Christina, for how many more questions? One more question. We'll go up the back, because this gentleman up the very back has been waving his hand and we've been down the front the whole time, so to the cheap seats. We'll go up there.
It's a bit harsh. Sorry about the cheap seats.
Hi everyone, my name's Robert. I'm the very proud owner of a Year 10 daughter who's, well actually she owns me in reality. She's just done this magnificent test at school, went for 2.5 hours, and the result came back that your best roles are war correspondent, journalist, lawyer, and 2 others, nursing, which you scoffed at, and something else, which actually might not be a bad scoff by what you said. But it didn't come back saying, you're strong in resilience, you're not, it's that still that pigeonhole. So she's sitting there looking at, I want to be a historian. She's not looking at, I want to learn skills. How does that change?
That's a great question. How do you reframe that so that young lady, knows what her assets are?
Well, with really good information. So we analysed 4.6 million job ads 2 years ago, and we asked employers in Australia, what are you looking for beyond the kind of pure technical skill? And they came up with their top 4 were digital skills and ability to kind of adapt in the digital world, problem solving and critical thinking. Interestingly, by the way, to also what you said, 181% increase in employers asking for bilingual skills.
Wow.
And we've got the lowest ever completion of a second language at Year 12 in Australia in 40 years. Presentation and communication skills. So then we said, okay, let's just see if that's real. So we used a proxy of wages, and actually we found that employers were absolutely prepared to pay more for young people coming into the workforce if they could demonstrate those what we call enterprising skills. They used to be called soft skills. When I left school, it was like, don't forget to learn how to speak, like after you're out of the school gate. And then we called them 21st century skills in the last 10 years, but we're in the 21st century now. So graduate employment reports, our research, on and on and on it goes, says that these skills and capabilities are being privileged. And by the way, they're the ones that we mapped that sat underneath those so-called jobs in the clusters. So now our job is to make sure that education is assessing and measuring those skills and capabilities so that your daughter can articulate those as she walks out of the school gate to employers and other people, because she is not that, whatever that tool was that the school did is kind of belongs to the 20th century. That's that kind of pick a job and a dream job. I think what we've heard is evidenced here tonight. That story is not the story of the future.
Just to follow up, sorry guys. Then the next issue comes, she goes to her career teacher, the second most influential person in this after her parents. Okay, I'm being ambitious. But the career teacher tells her, let's read that report. I mean, career teachers, and I asked about her career teacher, and she's doing that role part-time because really they don't want to put her in a class full-time. So where's that policy that career advice actually gets given by professionals, fed with professionals, rather than part-time teachers?
So my challenge would be, what's our 50% as parents? And, if you're outsourcing your kid's career to the career teacher, I mean, I'd challenge that view. You're absolutely right. A lot of people ask me, how do I become CEO, right? You always get it.
Yeah.
And the answer is, in organisations, they're so flat and they change so quickly, you can never get your eye on certain roles. That was yesterday's run up the ladder. And it's exactly what you're saying. My advice is always, it's about the collection of skills and competencies and experience. So I think as parents, we can, it's in our ability to change that conversation with our kids. If I take my daughter, I've got a 12-year-old going on 20, probably kind of like yourself. We're sending her to NASA because we want her to learn about STEM and get her really excited about STEM. So now,
That's
obviously,
straight to the top.
we have...
Excuse the pun.
But, obviously, we're able to do that. But once again, if you can think differently about the conversation you have with your kids, and that's our 50%. We shouldn't be expecting government to do that for us or the schools to do it for us.
And I'd just say, I think education, if you're thinking about the future as well, we currently use such a crude measure to group children. We use age, and there is a lot of conversation now around even how do we customise better based on capability, and it's not just a mass production system where we pump people through. So I think, I wouldn't be surprised if in, future years we do really even think about not only the capability side of things, but even how we organise classrooms and children.
But having said that, career advice is kind of dead, like it's done. So career management, career navigation, that's a new skill. That's a new capability and skill set. But career advice, nobody can actually advise, really. But the skills and capabilities, and I think parents, by the way, it's very important to know because our research shows parents are still the number one kind of advisor to their children, alongside their peers.
And that is a wrap for us from up here tonight because we've run out of time. But I want to thank you for coming along and being so fully participating so fully in tonight's discussion. And of course, I want to thank our panel for giving up their time and before tonight's event as well. They were great in discussing with me the rather many issues that we covered over the hour and a half with you here tonight. But can you before we do the thanks, I've got to remind you about one other thing. Our next event's a really big one for the 50th anniversary of La Trobe University. The Honourable Michael Kirby, who of course is a graduate of this esteemed institution, will be providing a lecture on health, law and sexuality. Thursday, May the 4th at 5:30 p.m. till 6:45 p.m. Tickets are on sale. You can go to the La Trobe University website, but I think Eventbrite also has them on sale as well. And you can have a look at all the details behind me. And it does say La Trobe up there, doesn't it? Can you please thank James, Jan, Fiona and David?